Hi there, this is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, and welcome to another episode of In the Frame. Today I'm going to talk about Indicator's January releases. 4 films that are all from the 1930s. 3 of them are pre-code films. Now, none of these films I would describe as great films, but they're all good and certainly enjoyable and watchable, and as always with Indicator, the extras are wonderful. But perhaps if you're not an Indicator slave like myself, you could maybe pick these up in a sale at a later date. I know Indicator only really do maybe 2 sales a year. So I'm just going to go through them, not in too much detail, but they are kind of interesting to talk about, but perhaps not as kind of individual random reviews. So from 1931, we have An American Tragedy, directed by Joseph von Sternberg, which was later remade as A Place in the Sun, or adapted from the same book, with Montgomery Clift and Liz Taylor. And then we have Desire, by Frank Borzage, directed by Marlene Dietrich, starring Marlene Dietrich and Gary Cooper. We have Honour Among Lovers from 1931 with Claudette Colbert and Frederick March. And from 1932 we have Love Me Tonight with Maurice Chevalier and Jeanette MacDonald, and Charlie Ruggles, who actually appears in a couple of these films, and of course Charlie Ruggles pretty much playing himself, and this is directed by Ruben Mamoulian. So these, as you can tell, got some star power, but obviously this isn't perhaps the video for people who don't watch black and white films. Look away, because these are all black and white, strangely enough. So we'll start at spine number 374. This is Mamoulian's Love Me Tonight with Maurice Chevalier and Jeanette MacDonald. This is a musical, and I'll start off by saying I'm not the biggest Maurice Chevalier fan in the world. I do find him somewhat kind of smug and annoying, but I actually enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I would. It's wonderfully directed by Ruben Mamoulian. It's got actually really good musical numbers, and there's a couple of just standout sequences, including one where Chevalier is kind of singing a song, and he's a tailor who works in the shop. Somebody comes in from his shop and he kind of picks up the tune and hums it, and then he leaves the shop, and then it goes through a series of characters who never reappear in the film, but they're all singing this song, and it's like it ends up being like the soldiers singing the song, and it's just an amazing sequence, just beautifully done. So as I said, I enjoyed this a lot more than I actually thought I was going to. And Charlie Ruggles being Charlie Ruggles, Myrna Loy's in it as well. All of these films are kind of about class, as quite a lot of 1930s Hollywood films were. This one is about a tailor. It's set in Paris, but obviously everybody's American. A tailor played by Chevalier, who's all into love and all that. And he falls for Jeanette MacDonald, who's not in his class, and so he pretends to be a baron, and there's all manner of hijinks. But again, it's really so well done, and as I said, well directed. And for a musical, it's not just a story with scenes and then they stick a song in. the songs actually propel the story and are actually relevant and part of the story. So instead of, some musicals, the songs kind of jut out and almost grind everything to a halt to have a musical number. This handles it a little bit differently, and the songs are actually woven into the whole film, so it's not as kind of jarring as some musicals are, at least for me. This has got a 4K scan from a 2023 restoration. It's got a commentary with Glenn Kenny and Farron Smith-Nehemi from 2023, who are fairly regulars. Isn't It Romantic is the song that gets hummed and then spread through the town like a virus. But Isn't It Romantic, there's a 27 minute in-depth discussion with Jeff Andrew about the film, strangely enough. There's Hollywood on Parade, there's excerpts, 3-minute excerpts from 1932 of Maurice Chevalier and Jeanette MacDonald performing musical numbers from the film for the newsreels. The original trailer, and of course with Indicator limited editions, there's a nice booklet with the star on one cover and the director on the other cover. So this was actually quite delightful. I will say 89 minutes. There is a point where I thought the film was actually finished, and then it goes on for another like 10-15 minutes. There's a kind of natural stopping point, and then it goes on for another 10-15 minutes, which can be a little bit jarring because you think it's over and then it's not really, and then it is now. But that was actually a delightful surprise because I'll be honest, I wasn't really looking forward to watching it because of Maurice Chevalier, but it's so well directed and actually shows you the power of actually moving the camera, because obviously in the early days of talkies, Hollywood made a lot of stage adaptations and the films were very stagey and the camera didn't really get moved a lot, but the camera in Love Me Tonight is really fluid, and again it's got a couple of really good musical set pieces, and the use of songs is kind of different from your traditional musical, if you like. Then Spine Number 199 is Honour Among Lovers by Claudia Colbert and Frederick March, and this is directed by Dorothy Arzner, who also has Merrily We Go to Hell, I think, which is in Criterion, also with Frederick March, I believe. And this co-stars Charlie Ruggles again, being Charlie Ruggles, and an early performance by Ginger Rogers. Again, this is about class. This is about March, who's a successful stock market broker, and he falls for his secretary, Claudette Colbert, but she's involved with another guy who's wants to be successful. So again, all these films are kind of about money and class, and Frederick March helps this guy out because he's in love with Claudette Colbert, but she's theoretically in love with this other guy. This is from 1931. Again, pre-code, so there's talk of like divorce and things like that. I mean, you'll get to another of these films that goes even further than even mentioning divorce. I mean, cover your ears. Again, this is only 76 minutes, but this absolutely flies by. Two brilliant central performances. Yes, the story is somewhat contrived. You can kind of predict what's going to happen. Again, a booklet with the two stars, and there's Dorothy Arzner. But again, this is a whole lot of fun that kind of spirals out of control as kind of actions have more serious and more serious consequences. But again, you can probably figure out how it ends, but it's still an enjoyable journey. And then we get to probably the best one out of the four, and that's Frank Borzegi's Desire from 1936. So this is actually after Code. Dietrich and Cooper. Again, I've never been a huge fan of Cooper, but he's actually very good in this, as he was in Lubitsch, Bluebeard's Eighth Wife. Frank Borzage, if you want to learn more about him, I suggest you go to Roger Kirby's channel. He did a mini-series on Borzage last year. And this is wonderful. Dietrich, again, I wouldn't say she's the greatest actor in the world, but certainly she is iconic, and the camera is just gravitates to her. There's certainly no doubt about that. But she does actually have some stuff to do in this film, as opposed to you can be reductive and say in some of her films she's just an iconic clothes horse. That's probably a bit too harsh. But in this she's iconic and magnetic, but she also gives a really good performance. So again, this is about class and money. Dietrich is involved with the jewellery thieves. So at the start, she is buying a pearl necklace, but she gets the store owner to deliver it to her supposed husband, but that's technically not who it is, and there's just a wonderful sense of mixed identity and mixed up identities, leading to hilarious consequences. There's a brilliant scene, which I'm not going to spoil, involving a psychiatrist. The film was, as it says in the back of the box, this was produced under the personal supervision of Ernst Lubitsch, and it does have that kind of not full Lubitsch touch, maybe a little Lubitsch fondo perhaps. And there is rumours that Lubitsch filmed some of the scenes. And Gary Cooper Gary Cooper gets involved, but again thinking that Dietrich is something other than what she is, and her partner, I don't know if it's John Halliday or William Frawley. Again, there's lots of familiar faces if you might not know the names, and that kind of triangle with her. It's a wonderful script. Most of it goes from Paris to Spain, I believe. It's just a wonderful, wonderful film. It's certainly one of my favourite Dietrich, because again she does actually have a bit of a character arc, which you can't always say about all of her films. But again, her outfits as usual are absolutely stunning, but she actually gives a really good performance as well. And as usual, the way she's lit and the way that massive camera loves her, it is absolutely stunning. This has a commentary with Nathaniel Bell and David Duval from 2021. There's a 1958 audio interview with Frank Borzage, which is 40 minutes. Natalie Morris talks about Gary Cooper from 2023, which is 12 minutes. There's a radio presentation of the film from 1937, which is 55 minutes, starring Dietrich and Herbert Marshall, who has a small role in this, plays the Gary Cooper role. And there's also an appearance by Akim Tamiroff, who is kind of a regular of Orson Welles later on. But if you want to see a young Akim Tamiroff, it's quite startling, but you can see Tamiroff in 1936. I don't think I actually talked about the extras on Honor Among Lovers, so I apologise. I'll just go back and go over the extras in this. There's a commentary by Eloise Ross from 2023. George Folsey, who shot the film. Again, there's an audio interview from 1958, which is 130 minutes long, which I haven't listened to. Sugar and Spice, which is a 13-minute piece by Lucy Bolton, talking about the early career of Ginger Rogers. There's Hail and Farewell, 1943, a 7-minute documentary on the achievements of the Women Auxiliary Army Corps, or the WAC, produced during Dorothy Asner's time as director and supervisor with the military branch. And To the Ladies, 1944, which is 15 minutes, which is a dramatised recruitment film for the army, or for the WAC, produced during Asner's time. And again, obviously, as I said, you get the booklet. And then we get An American Tragedy by Joseph von Sternberg. This was just a job for Sternberg. This wasn't a personal project. As I said, this was, or the source from the novel was redone by George Stevens as A Place in the Sun with Montgomery Clift, Shelley Winters and Elizabeth Taylor, but there's some differences as far as the film's sympathies between the two women in this. So this stars Philip Holmes, who, again, might not recognise the name, but he's in Lubitsch's Broken Lullaby, available on Indicator as well, and Howard Hawks' The Criminal Code, also available on Indicator. He's a fairly bland, kind of wooden actor. Obviously he's good looking, but he is fairly wooden. But it also stars Sylvia Sidney, who again, you might not recognise the name, but if I say she's the older lady in Beetlejuice, who when she smokes, smoke comes out of her neck. But you see her obviously in 1931. She still has those big eyes, but it's just wonderful to see her when she was a lot younger. Again, this is a film about money and class, and Philip Holmes is a bellboy in Kansas City, proving that nothing good happens in Kansas City or comes out of Kansas City. And the ladies like him. We're introduced to him when he's taking a couple of ladies up to the hotel, and the younger lady gives him a rather large tip, and he's seeing one of the chambermaids. They go out for a night on the town, involving somebody driving a car that they've borrowed. Something terrible happens and he goes on the run, even though it's not his fault. He ends up in Chicago. He ends up being a bellboy again, and then because of his rich uncle, he ends up being a supervisor in a factory where it's an all-female staff, and they all look at him lovingly while he's kind of vapidly walking about looking blank. But because this is pre-code, Sternberg throws in little shots that make you think he's probably got more about sex on his mind rather than the money part. Obviously the money would be good. And he falls for Sylvia Sidney, who's one of the factory girls that kind of starts. But because of his uncle, he's also in this other circle, and he falls for somebody else, and he's got two women in the go, and Sylvia Sidney becomes pregnant. Again, pregnancy outside marriage. You can tell this is 1931 and it's pre-code. This film was actually banned in Britain when it came out because it talked about pregnancy outside marriage. So even though it was pre-code, pre-Hays Code in the States, Britain banned it outright. It was too strong. There's a whole thing about water in the film, and there's wonderful shots of trees. Sternberg goes full on with shots of trees. There's a wonderful shot in the city where Holmes and Sidney are having a conversation, but the branches of a tree, or several trees, and the way it's lit, it is kind of like prison mesh across their faces. It's really beautifully shot. Not only is this a really interesting film, the extras are wonderful as well, because it was based on a novel by a German who was pretty much a communist, went to Russia, wrote another book about how great communism is. And this was in the period where Eisenstein had just made October, which didn't please the Russian bosses. So he was on a travelling trip from Russia. He ended up in Hollywood, got a contract from Paramount. So because he had met the writer Theodore Dreiser, I forgot his name. So he was going to make a film of his book called An American Tragedy. And he submitted the draft, but Paramount wanted nothing to do with it. So they ended up releasing Eisenstein of his contract. But apparently Eisenstein saw the finished film and said it was so poor. He didn't finish it. The writer was raging because, he wanted Eisenstein to do it because he was a sympathetic character rather than Joseph von Sternberg, who again, it was just a job for von Sternberg because it was going to be Eisenstein originally. That would have been interesting to see, because one of the reasons Eisenstein was over was to look at the new talkie technology. So that's kind of fascinating. Also, D.W. Griffith at one point may have done it, Lubitsch may have done it, but both of them ended up either turning it down or not doing it. So it was going to be Eisenstein, but they just hated the script that he wrote with his, I think he brought a couple of collaborators with him from Russia. So it ended up in von Sternberg's hands. It's an interesting film again, but because of Philip Holmes, who is very wooden, and I mean he almost, it's almost like a robotic performance. And again, it's this whole, the point of the book was, that poverty in your upbringing can force you to neglect morals and become something else. But again, it's more about the pursuit of the American dream of greed and lust can then alter your morality and make you do things that you perhaps wouldn't do. The character's mother runs a mission in Kansas City, and she blames herself for not giving him the right start. But again, he makes all, and I'm not going into spoilers by saying it ends up in court, and in his defence, the defence lawyers pretty much come up with, he's just a monumental coward. All these things have happened to him, it's because he just runs away from everything. He's just a monumental coward, a moral coward, and he's not to blame just because he's such a coward. You can actually do a drinking game with how many times his defence counsel call him a coward. It's a fascinating film. Again, the extras are almost as fascinating. The background of the film is fascinating as well. This is a 2019 restoration from a 4K scan. There's a 2023 commentary by Josh Nelson. There's a 1958, again, audio interview with von Sternberg and conversation with George Pratt, who does all those 1958 pieces. That's 27 minutes long. And there's a Lee Garms audio interview from 1958, which is 89 minutes long, again in conversation with Pratt. Lee Garms shot the film. And there's a 29-minute piece from Tony Raines. We all love Tony Raines from 2023, whereas he discusses about the background of the project, and the novelist far better than I've summed it up. There's a video essay by Tag Gallagher from 2023, which is 8 minutes, about nature and nurture. And there's a gallery, there's essays by Imogen Sarah Smith, Jeff Billington, and again they're about Eisenstein. So there's Philip Holmes, actually looking more animated than he does in the film. And von Sternberg in a typical humble pose with his big riding boots on. I have to show you a picture of Eisenstein, because it is... There's Eisenstein relaxing at home. That's quite impressive. He was actually up for the role of in Eraserhead, but unfortunately he was dead by that time. And there's an image of von Sternberg looking intense. So it is a fascinating film, and for just a job for von Sternberg, he moves it along really well. There's wonderful use of dissolves. There's even an article from 1931 about Dreiser's anger about not having Eisenstein do it. So again, Windicator, kind of fascinating extras as well as these interesting films from the 30s. So that's 4 30s films from Indicator, with notable directors. But again, if you don't like black and white films, then this month's maybe not for you. Again, perhaps none of them are 5-star masterpieces or anything, but certainly for me, Desire is the pick of the bunch. But all of the titles you could probably wait and pick up on a sale, but they're all worth seeing, as Indicator continue to do and release fascinating little films. And again, I'm looking forward to another wonderful year for Indicator. Not that I am programmed to say that in any way, shape or form. So thanks very much for watching this episode of In the Frame. Please let me know if you've seen any of these films and what you think of them. I do think some of them are available in Region A Blu-ray. I think Kino Lorber might have a couple of them. So you can let me know what you think of them. So this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying thanks very much for watching, as always, and farewell.